She flew across the ocean expecting a debate and left with a truth that shook her to tears. When US Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett faced off against Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré, the world expected politics, but what unfolded was raw, unfiltered humanity. One child's handwritten note, one question that silenced the room, and one conversation that changed everything. This isn't just a debate. It's a turning point. Watch until the end. You'll never see global leadership the same way again. The envelope arrived without ceremony, but it carried the weight of an earthquake. It wasn't sealed with a gold-embossed crest or marked by the formality of high office. It bore only a single name scrawled in tight, slanted handwriting, Jasmine Crockett. And beneath it, the signature of a man the world still didn't quite know how to define, Ibrahim Traoré, the young, defiant president of Burkina Faso. At first glance, it looked like a letter out of place, something passed hand to hand across borders rather than transmitted through encrypted state channels. But what it contained wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. An invitation, or rather, a challenge. A live, unscripted debate. No moderators, no media filters, just Crockett and Traoré on stage together in front of the world. The topic, Africa's future and the West's role in it. The stakes, higher than either side had fully grasped. Jasmine Crockett read the letter 3 times. The language wasn't hostile, but it pulsed with urgency. Traoré didn't accuse, he provoked. He didn't request permission, he offered confrontation. "We are done being spoken for," he wrote. "Come and we'll speak to each other, in truth, in full view." The timing couldn't have been more dangerous. Across Africa, old alliances with Western governments were cracking. France had pulled troops from Sahel nations. The US faced scrutiny over CYA activity and economic leverage in post-coup transitions. In the halls of Congress, whispers of quiet realignments reached Jasmine's ears weekly. Still, nothing had prepared her for this. The White House urged restraint. So did the State Department. "You don't need to dignify this," one advisor said, sliding policy briefs across her desk. But she wasn't interested in optics. She was thinking about legacy, about honesty, about whether democracy still meant being brave enough to step into uncomfortable rooms. And so she gave her answer, not in private, but at a press conference on Capitol Hill where flashbulbs burst like fireworks the moment she stepped to the podium. Her voice was calm, measured, but firm. If the United States of America is what we say it is, if democracy is more than speeches, then we don't silence uncomfortable conversations. We walk straight into them. I accept the world stopped. Then it ignited. News outlets raced to translate Traoré's letter. Social media fractured into fevered camps. Some hailed her courage, others her recklessness. And across the Atlantic, in Ouagadougou, Traoré said nothing publicly, but his silence only added to the storm. As Jasmine prepared to board a flight to Accra, the neutral ground chosen for the debate, she looked out over the capital one last time. She didn't know what she would face. She didn't know if this was a trap, a test, or the start of something larger than either of them could control. All she knew was that something had been set in motion. This wasn't just diplomacy anymore. This was a collision course between 2 visions of justice, one forged in Western institutions, the other born in the fires of African self-determination. And neither was backing down. The sun over Accra rose like a curtain on history. The city, long known as a bridge between Africa's past and its future, now braced for something wholly new. A debate that would be unlike any staged before. It wasn't just about policy or political posturing. This was personal. This was symbolic. And by the time Jasmine Crockett's plane touched down at Kotoka International Airport, the atmosphere had already shifted. Thousands had taken to the streets. Some waved flags of Burkina Faso, others held up banners with Crockett's face beside the words, "Truth must travel both ways." The energy was electric, equal parts protest, celebration, and reckoning. For many, this wasn't about who was right. It was about whether power could finally be spoken to without permission. Inside the modest auditorium chosen for the event, global media assembled shoulder to shoulder. BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, RFI, everyone was there. Live streams were already live, hashtags already trending, but inside the room, everything was still. 2 chairs, 2 microphones, no stage dressing, no mediator, just 2 names and the weight of 2 continents behind them. Jasmine arrived first. She wore deep blue, professional, composed, but her eyes scanned the room like someone entering court before a verdict. She'd built a reputation in Washington as principled, firm, and intellectually sharp. But nothing had prepared her for this kind of theatre. This wasn't a hearing. This was history. Live. Then he entered. Ibrahim Traoré walked in with the quiet steadiness of a man who had already made peace with what might follow. Dressed in earth-toned fatigues, no security detail in sight, he carried no folder, no notes, only a small, leather-bound journal tucked into one hand. The applause was quiet at first, then built like a wave, raw, irregular, emotionally charged. The two didn't shake hands. They nodded. That was all. Then it began. Traoré spoke first. His voice was even, his words poetic, yet unsparing. "We were born with dust in our mouths," he began, told it was freedom, told we were partners. "But our children still walk miles for water, and your corporations still name our mountains." He didn't accuse with venom. He accused with fatigue, with history. "We are not asking for pity," he said. "We are asking to be left standing on our own feet." The audience was stunned. Even those who had expected fire were struck by how calm the fire could sound. Jasmine took a breath before responding. "You speak of wounds," she said, "and I don't deny them, but how can you speak of liberation while silencing your own press, while cancelling elections? Is that the freedom you demand, or is it just a different cage?" Gasps rippled through the room. But Traoré did not blink. He leaned forward. "And you, Congresswoman, do you not wear democracy like armor, while your banks extract what your armies no longer need to fight for?" The words cut, not because they were loud, but because they were quiet. Delivered like a mirror, not a weapon. And suddenly this wasn't about them anymore. It was about all the rooms they represented, all the truths long unspoken, all the histories still bleeding. They had come to argue, yes, but neither seemed interested in winning. What they came to do, perhaps without knowing it, was expose something buried, and once unearthed, the world couldn't look away. The temperature in the room didn't rise, but it felt like it did. After the first round of exchanges, the tension wasn't just political, it was personal. This wasn't a debate in the traditional sense. No points were being tallied. No moderators were cutting in with commercial breaks. What unfolded felt more like a reckoning than a conversation, and no one, least of all Jasmine Crockett, was prepared for what came next. Jasmine leaned in, her voice calm but edged with conviction. "If we're going to be honest, let's talk about what honesty costs," she said. "You speak of liberation, yet credible reports suggest your government has signed deals with Wagner Group mercenaries, Russian paramilitary actors, the same ones destabilizing parts of Africa while pretending to protect it. So I ask you, President Traoré, not as a critic, but as a peer, can a nation be sovereign if it sells its soul in the dark?" There was a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Even the reporters who had grown numb to political sparring sat up straighter. It was a direct hit, a US Congresswoman publicly challenging an African head of state with classified-level intelligence in full view of the world. Traoré didn't flinch. "I expected that," he said softly, and I will not deny it. Yes, we have spoken to the Russians, and the Chinese, and the Iranians, because when we knocked on the West's door, your door, we were offered lectures, not lifelines. He stood now, pacing slightly, but with purpose rather than anger. You call it selling our soul, I call it survival. Our people die in schools, in markets, in mosques. When we asked for help, we got paperwork. When we begged, we got conditions, so we stopped begging. Then he looked directly at her, and for the first time his voice cracked, not with weakness, but with clarity. You don't know what it feels like to bury a 10-year-old and then be told your country doesn't meet the criteria for aid. You don't know what it means to choose between dictatorship and death. Crockett's expression shifted. She was still resolute, but something inside her softened. She had come to debate a man, but what she found was a country's grief, standing on two legs and speaking into a microphone. Outside the auditorium, news of Traoré's admission hit the airwaves like a second explosion. But instead of condemnation, something unexpected happened. Protests broke out, not against Traoré and not against Crockett. They were against a silence that had gone on too long. In Johannesburg, young activists held vigils. In Paris, students blocked intersections. In Atlanta, murals began appearing overnight. Images of Crockett and Traoré, face to face, eyes locked, with the words, "Truth is not always pretty, but it's always necessary." Back inside the debate hall, Crockett finally broke the silence. "I don't pretend to know what your people endure," she said. "But I do know this. We're all being shaped by systems older than us. And if we don't challenge those systems, even when it's uncomfortable, then we're not leaders. We're echoes." Traoré nodded. The debate had shifted. It was no longer a collision of egos. It was a peeling back of history's layers, of the wounds still scarring entire nations. The audience no longer listened for applause lines. They listened because something rare was happening. Two leaders weren't just speaking, they were hearing each other. Outside the debate hall, the night had swallowed the city, but no one was leaving. Crowds surged in Independence Square, watching the live stream projected onto massive LED screens as if the fate of a continent depended on every word. Drums, chants, and cell phone flashlights turned the atmosphere into something between a concert and a revolution. People were no longer watching politicians. They were watching a story unfold that felt like their own. Inside, the debate had moved into a new register. It wasn't about proving who was right anymore. It was about proving that listening was still possible. Then came the moment no one expected. During a brief break, just as the moderators were preparing for closing remarks, a young girl, no older than 8, slipped past a distracted security line and approached the edge of the stage. In her hand was a folded note. She didn't speak, just extended the paper toward Traoré, eyes wide with quiet resolve. A guard rushed to intercept her, but Traoré raised his hand. "It's all right," he said. He knelt to take the paper and read it silently. Jasmine watched, curious, her own heart tightening without knowing why. After a moment, Traoré looked up and simply said, "She wrote, 'Thank you for saying we matter.'" The cameras caught the exchange, the image of the girl barefoot holding the note and the president reading it with tears beginning to rim his eyes lit social media on fire within seconds. No soundbite would be more shared, more quoted, or more powerful than that silent moment of gratitude. Jasmine swallowed hard. When the stage reset, she returned to her seat different. She wasn't here as a defender of the US position anymore. She was here as a witness to something larger than policy. She took a breath and then, breaking from every prepared note, looked at Traoré and asked, "What would justice actually look like to you?" Her voice wasn't challenging. It was open, vulnerable. Traoré didn't answer immediately. He sat back, thoughtful. And then he spoke, slowly, clearly. "It would look like this," he said, motioning around the room. Two people from two worlds, sitting across from each other without pretending, no threats, no conditions, just truth. He paused. "But if you need a symbol," he continued, "justice looks like us writing our own story, and you listening without interrupting." The room was silent. For the first time since the debate began, no one scribbled notes, no one typed. Even the translators in their booths paused, because there it was, the question that changed everything. Not who is right, but how can we begin again? Jasmine nodded slowly. She wasn't smiling, but something in her eyes softened. It was the look of someone who had come expecting a debate, and instead discovered a reckoning. Outside, the crowd erupted, not in rage or celebration, but in a long, sustained chant, "We matter, we matter, we matter." Something had changed, not just in that room, but in how people felt about being seen. By the time the lights dimmed in the auditorium and the final words had been spoken, it was clear that what had taken place was no longer just a debate. It was a rupture, a bridge, a beginning. Two leaders, born worlds apart, had sat across from each other, not to declare dominance, but to declare dignity. And the world had listened. The next morning, headlines didn't ask who won, they asked what had shifted. On both sides of the Atlantic, something was stirring. The hashtags had changed from outrage to awakening. We Matter began trending in South Africa, then Senegal, then London. In New York City, university students organized spontaneous forums titled "What Justice Looks Like," using footage from the debate to begin difficult conversations in classrooms and community centers. Jasmine Crockett flew home to Atlanta, exhausted but altered. What she had experienced couldn't be measured by political metrics. It wasn't a campaign moment. It was something more intimate, more sacred, like being let in on a truth you couldn't unhear, a truth that now lived under her skin. Within days of her return, she held a town hall, not to explain herself, but to share what she had witnessed. Her voice cracked as she recounted the little girl who slipped a note to a president. She spoke of courage, not just in speaking truth, but in receiving it. "You can disagree with someone," she said to the crowd gathered in a local church basement, "and still be changed by them. That's the power of listening without the fear of losing yourself." At the same time, across the ocean, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a sea of young people at a student summit in Ouagadougou. There were no guards, no red carpets, no script, just a circle of future leaders hungry to shape something new. He didn't speak as a president, he spoke as a man who carried too many stories to keep them to himself. "Do not build your identity in opposition to another," he told them. "Build it in service to your people. If the world will not make room for you, carve it anyway." The debate had ended, but the conversation had only just begun. Weeks later, in a quiet live stream viewed by over 1 million people, Crockett and Traoré appeared again, this time not to debate, but to reflect. No scripts, no spectacle, just two people sharing what they had learned from each other. Crockett admitted, "I didn't expect to be humbled, but I was." Traoré replied, "I didn't expect to be heard, but I was." And that, more than applause or trending views, was the true echo. Because what they proved together was that the real power lies not in winning an argument, but in opening a space where truth, even painful truth, can be spoken and received. That kind of courage doesn't fade, it multiplies. And as new murals emerged from Cairo to Chicago bearing the phrase, "Write your story, hear theirs," it became clear that this wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning. Jasmine Crockett walked into that auditorium in Accra expecting a debate, a political match between herself, a US congresswoman, and Ibrahim Traoré, the defiant young leader of Burkina Faso. She came prepared with facts, policy positions, and arguments shaped by years in Washington. What she didn't expect was to walk away with her heart changed, her beliefs stretched, and her understanding of power rewritten. What began as a confrontation between two worldviews, Western democracy and African self-determination, quickly transformed into something much deeper. This wasn't about winning, it wasn't about defending a platform or delivering sound bites. It was about truth, not just the facts, but the kind of truth that's personal, lived, and too often buried beneath diplomacy and noise. Traoré spoke not as a headline, but as a man shaped by war, by poverty, by betrayal, and by the stubborn hope that his people deserved better. Jasmine responded with sharpness and pride, but as he shared the cost of surviving in a world designed to overlook voices like his, something shifted in her. And when a little girl interrupted history to hand him a note that said, "Thank you for saying we matter," it became clear this wasn't a debate, this was a moment of reckoning. By the end, both leaders had stopped performing and started reflecting. Jasmine asked what justice actually looked like. Traoré said it looked like finally being heard. And in that exchange, something extraordinary happened. Two people from different worlds saw each other, not perfectly, not completely, but truly. And the world watched, not for who would win, but for who would dare to listen. The lesson from their story is clear. We don't need more noise. We need more listening. True leadership isn't measured by how loudly we speak, but by how deeply we hear, especially when the truths being told are uncomfortable. In everyday life, we all face moments where we're quick to defend, quick to react, quick to be right. But what if, instead, we paused? What if we asked a better question and stayed open to the answer, even if it challenges us? Listening, really listening, won't make you weaker. It makes you wiser. And like Jasmine Crockett, you might just find that the greatest transformation comes not from proving your point, but from letting yourself be changed by someone else's. So now we ask you, who showed greater leadership in this story? A. Jasmine Crockett, for showing vulnerability and growth through listening. B. Ibrahim Traoré, for speaking truth with courage and conviction. Despite the risks, drop your answer in the comments, A or B. What about you? What did you feel while hearing their story? Did something shift in your perspective? What parts resonated with your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insight might help someone else reflect more deeply too. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think in a new way, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful, human-centered stories to life, and we can't do it without you. Thank you for being here. Keep listening, keep growing, and most of all, keep showing up with heart